Good evening, and welcome to The Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of America. Today is December 12th, 2014, and I have a special guest today, Bert Held from New Zealand. Now, he did originally come from the United States, but most of his adult life he's lived and worked in that down under country that probably most Americans don't really know very much about, except for perhaps it being the location for the Lord of the Rings movies. So we know that it's quite dramatic landscapes. So we're going to be talking about New Zealand. We're going to be talking a little bit about Bert himself. He's very knowledgeable about political scene in the UK and in New Zealand, and pretty much around the world. He keeps his ear to the ground quite a lot. And I also have about a 12-minute clip, very interesting stuff about what's going on, since we're talking about the UK anyway, the European Union and UK and James Cameron and UKIP party, and some good, nice, interesting footage about just looking at the streets of London and various other towns. It's not just a talking head video. So hopefully we'll have some fun today and maybe a little bit lighter topics than some of the more serious stuff that I tend to go on and on about. So Bert, thank you. Welcome for coming on the show. I really appreciate you taking out the time for your busy schedule. I'm joking. He's actually on vacation permanently.
That's
basically
right. Retired, yes.
Yeah. So tell me, how long have you lived in New Zealand?
Oh, a good 25 years.
25 years.
Former Athens, Ohio. I grew up in Athens, Ohio.
Right.
I'm still an American citizen. I'm not a subject of the Queen.
Okay.
Right. But I have lived in New Zealand for 25 years.
Yeah.
Bought a block of land, built a house, and taught school for.
And you have two children?
Two daughters.
Two
yes.
daughters.
Yes.
And your wife is a New Zealand native?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so, so now you're sort of visiting your hometown again,
Yes.
and we knew each other way back when.
Dark
we were,
ages.
Just in our early, 12, really preteen years, about 12 or
Middle
around.
school.
Middle
Yeah.
school,
Yep.
12, 13. So.
We were sitting in biology class when Kennedy was assassinated.
Oh, is that where we were?
That's
We were in
where-
biology class?
Yes, we were in biology class.
I didn't remember that.
Yep.
I do remember that we had to be admonished a few times
Yes.
by the teacher about, or some teacher, I'm not sure if it was in biology
It was the
class,
biology teacher. It was very serious, a bit like Pat O'Brien, whatever. You'd sit up very straight. I was admonished because I was writing a little logo on my papers, Girls, Guns, and Gin. And
yes.
he said that I should occupy my mind with more, more focused attention,
Yes, yeah.
Yes,
And
which I didn't agree with.
I
but
think I
anyways.
remember it was like a cocktail glass
That's
and a
right.
gun or something crossed.
That's
or
right, it
something
was.
like
Yes,
that.
Girls, Guns, and Gin. I thought it was very clever.
In every paper
Yes.
you would put that on there.
Sort of, yes. Anyway,
Yeah.
so characterized my attitude towards life ever since then.
Yeah, right, absolutely, yeah. So anyway, you found your way and found a woman of your dreams in London.
In London, that's right.
And have been happily married ever since.
Yep.
That's really great. So let's talk about more of the political aspect of it, because we talk about politics and a lot on the show. What form of government does the New Zealand have?
Constitutional, a parliamentary system with the Queen is nominally the head of state, but her representative in New Zealand is titled the Governor General. And again, an honorary position, and the Prime Minister is the head of government. And they only have one house. So there's only what we would consider a lower house. There's no Senate. They did away with their upper house.
So no House of Lords.
No House or no senators. It's all sort of members of Parliament would sort of be like congressmen are here. Same
Right.
thing. They represent a constituency, and if you have a majority of one when things are voted on, you win. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And what would you say the most serious political issue in New Zealand that's happening right now? The biggest thing on the everybody's minds in New Zealand now.
Probably just they were very lucky they avoided the recession, and there has been a degree of government austerity, but really the economy is improving, and in the last election the national government, or the Tories as they are known on the left, triumphed. They won their strongest victory since the 1920s. We have a system of voting in New Zealand where you vote for your local MP with one vote, and then you have a party vote that you can give to whatever party you want. That's where people like to make trouble, and usually it results in a coalition government, but this time, although the Tories won, they will form a little coalition, and the left has been left, particularly the Labour Party, a bit like the Democrats after the most recent election here, wondering what to do next.
Okay. So do you find this disturbing, concerning, or are you pleased with this outcome, or are you neutral?
Well, I've said to my friends in the Labour Party, you're going to have to think of some better policies if you want to get back into power. The current Prime Minister, Mr. Key, I tell them he's very much like a New Zealand version of Ronald Reagan, and everything bounces off him. He's been a remarkably successful politician. He entered politics in New Zealand after a very successful career as a currency trader. So a successful gambler, making money with using other people's money, very wealthy, and a remarkably adept and slick politician. So, so has a holiday home in Hawaii, and
probably a bit of a con man too.
Well, yes, like I say, a very successful gambler.
Yeah,
not many politicians in New Zealand with a recorded income of 50 million. So he's
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes.
So anyway, so you are you don't seem too concerned about the direction of politics. So things must be going fairly well in New Zealand.
Yes. I mean, there's a small population, and also governments can't overturn previous legislation. So there is a welfare state in place. There's a universal old age pension in place, of which I am now a proud recipient of. Unemployment is declining. It's mostly growing in the service economy, but the farmers are all happy, although the price of milk powder has dropped a bit. But real estate is booming in Auckland and Christchurch when they ever get around to rebuilding it. And
after the big devastating earthquake.
That's right, yes. They sort of moving very slowly to rebuild the city.
Yeah, okay.
But,
So overall, things are looking good.
Yes. The All Blacks are winning at football, and that's very important. Rugby, football.
Okay.
Yes, so there's not, the fact that the middle class voted national in this election, which is basically what happened, shows that they are content.
Okay.
So.
All right, so of course we know that New Zealand is out of the rough and tumble of the violence in world politics, and probably doesn't have a terrorist threat.
No.
They can't use that and hold that and dangle that over people's heads to to get people to do what they want.
No.
that if you don't give us more money, then the terrorists are gonna win. They're gonna attack us for sure. We need to build up our military, and we build a security surveillance state and police state, and militarize the police and make the military into police. The military become police, and the police become military, and they all join hands in a happy group, and hovering over everyone like a dark cloud, which is the way a lot of people are thinking. I don't know about the UK, but in the United States, a lot of people are very concerned about the rise of the security state. Bigger.
No, very limited in New Zealand. You have an unarmed police force by American standards. The only two terrorist incidents they've had is one, they found somebody who came in as a political refugee who had a little bit of blood on his hands, but he had a very successful golden-tongued lawyer who, after the public supported her to the tune of $2 million by the time they went all the way through the court system, said, "Oh, very well, you can stay here." But they have sent him down to Invercargill, which the great Keith Richards once described as the equivalent of North Dakota. So he's living in the provinces and probably keeping his head down. I'm sure they open his mail too, but anyway. And the only other one was a domestic affair in which a Maori activist got a bit over enthusiastic and sort of was doing a wannabe Che Guevara sort of thing. Only he was so portly that I seriously doubt he could have, hefted his rifle through the bush very successfully. And that was, they busted. Then again, an amusing result of trials and nothing at the end of the day. They said, "Naughty boy, don't do it again." So nothing like,
Just for the information of the audience, who are the Maori?
The Maori are the indigenous people of New Zealand who were there when the Europeans arrived. They began, the first contact, of course, was trade with the whalers. Predominantly American whalers came down to the Bay of Islands, and the Maori were a sort of, I guess you could describe, they had a lot in common with the Celts. The men feuded and the women farmed, and they lived in communities, sort of semi-fortified communities, but they'd all go to the beach for the summer because that's where the food was, and gathered the food, and they grew gardens around there. Anyway, at a certain point, the Maori acquired muskets, and after feuding amongst themselves, when the British finally turned up and signed the Treaty of Waitangi with the various tribes, it was not just with one tribe, but it was with all of them. And so that is the founding document of New Zealand. It's the equivalent of our Declaration of Independence, but it is a document that states this: in recognition of British sovereignty, we have these rights. And by and large, that agreement has been, certainly by American standards, has been honored to a remarkable extent. There are 4 Maori seats in Parliament that if you are Maori, you vote for those. And the Treaty of Waitangi flows through government policy in terms of acknowledging Maori and their language and that sort of thing. And are you interested in UK politics and world politics? Oh yes, I follow that as well.
You follow that as well. And of course, New Zealand being part of the United Kingdom, their policies probably
independent. They're not part of the UK.
Oh, you're not part of the UK.
They're not. The United Kingdom is Scotland, Wales, and England.
Okay, you're part of the
Commonwealth?
Commonwealth?
The Commonwealth. The former British Empire, now rebranded as the Commonwealth.
I got you. So this would be, then that makes more sense. You're right, that makes sense. Excuse me for that. Okay, so we have a clip. We're going to be, since we're talking about the United Kingdom and this part of the world that I don't really talk about that much. Let's show this clip, which is a British, apparently a British TV show.
Yes, yeah.
And but it's pretty good, and it's about, I think, around 15 or 20 minutes long. So let's roll that, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about that and other things.
No, the root cause of the challenge we face is the extremist narrative. So we must confront this extremism in all its forms. We must ban extremist preachers from our countries. We must root out extremism from our schools, universities, and prisons. As we do so, we must work with the overwhelming majority of Muslims who abhor the twisted narrative that has seduced some of our people.
In August, Cameron raised the national threat level to severe, which means an attack by ISIL supporters is highly likely. Since then, almost on an everyday basis, and all over the British mainstream media, there is a talk of urgency in battling Takfiri ideology and barring ISIL supporters from travelling abroad. Are elements of British establishment complicit in the spreading the hateful ISIL ideology across the society? No doubt. There are over 600 Salafi Takfiris of British origin now fighting in Syria and Iraq under ISIL flag. All of them are directly or indirectly associates of British Salafi hate preachers who are now freely promoting the so-called causes of ISIL. Likes of Anjem Choudary and Muhammad al-Arafi have never been charged with terrorism, while they openly roam in Britain, lecture in support of ISIL and recruit from the terrorist gang.
It is very shocking, but sadly it's not really surprising. Many ISIS recruiters are operating in London, distributing leaflets very openly. So, and there's been condemnation of that again, but that hasn't been stopped. So whether it's Twitter or whether it's distributing leaflets on the streets, again we're seeing that there's a very great tolerance to ISIS activities in the West. It appears that as long as they're killing Muslims abroad, you know, it's fine. It's when the Westerners are victims and suddenly that becomes a problem.
Even the terrorist who shot dead soldier when he stormed Canadian Parliament last month communicated with Choudary on Twitter. It was early in November when another proof of Britain complicity in channeling terrorists to Syria emerged. Abu Rumaysa, a notorious British ISIL terrorist, skipped Britain and shortly after was seen in Syria. Prior to his travel, British police had detained him, asked him a few questions, and then let him loose. How was he able to leave the UK and join a force that has declared war against Britain without the knowledge of the authorities? What remains to be seen is how long British figures can try to keep abusing ISIL threat for their militaristic and Orwellian approaches, both nationally and internationally.
November, the month associated with Halloween and spooky forces, appears to be presenting British Prime Minister David Cameron with a nightmare that could end up resulting in his head rolling as leader of the Conservative Party.
A month of misery is how the staunchly pro-Conservative Daily Telegraph forecast the coming weeks for the hapless Cameron. The British Premier warned yet again that Britain could quit membership of the European Union, ostensibly over the EU's lax controls on immigration. A populist British theme is that the United Kingdom is being inundated with foreign nationals who are consuming public spending funds and pinching jobs from Britons. By appearing to get tough on immigration, Cameron is betting that that will play well with voters. But by engaging in demagogic rhetoric, the Tory leader may end up fanning even more support for the more extreme right-wing UK Independence Party at the expense of his own party and his leadership. Earlier this month saw a minister resigning from Cameron's coalition government with junior partner the Liberal Democrats. Such is the bad blood between the ruling partners that the resigning minister Norman Baker didn't even give notice of stepping down to his boss, the Home Secretary Theresa May. He just walked off the job telling media how impossible it was to work with Tory colleagues. With only months to go before the British general election, Cameron's coalition government is coming apart at the seams. At the root of Cameron's fears is the meteoric rise of the far-right UK Independence Party. Fervently anti-immigration and anti-European Union, UKIP is stealing voters away from the centre-right Conservatives. Not only voters, but members of Parliament as well. On the 20th of November, another by-election has been triggered after a second Conservative MP announced that he was also quitting the party to join the upstart UKIP. The aptly named former Tory MP, now UKIP candidate Mark Reckless, is set to win the forthcoming local election by a safe margin. He is leading polls by 15 points ahead of the newly drafted-in Conservative candidate. If Cameron sees another scalp taken by the rival UKIP, that will put his party leadership and occupancy of 10 Downing Street under acute threat. Conservative-leaning news media are reporting on disgruntled backbenchers from within his own party as getting ready to ditch Cameron before the end of the year. The reasoning is that the window will give the party a fighting chance to regroup under a new leader for the national elections scheduled to take place in May 2015. The worrying thing for Cameron's party is that the defections are happening in what would be normally considered safe parliamentary seats. A recent Sunday newspaper poll found that across England, up to 1/3 of voters say they will vote for UKIP, led by the maverick man of the people, Nigel Farage. That level of support is on par with Cameron's Conservative Party. In only a matter of a few years, since the last general election in May 2010, the rival party has accelerated in electoral support to now pose a threat of overtaking the once dominant Tories. Two issues in particular are the row over the UK's mandatory contribution to the European Union budget and over perceived increasing immigration. Both issues have been in large part stoked by Cameron as a way of flexing his muscles to would-be voters, but in doing so, he runs the risk of only adding more grist to the UKIP mill. At the end of last month at the EU Leaders Summit in Brussels, David Cameron took many observers by surprise when he suddenly announced that Britain would not be paying extra budgetary contributions to the 28-member bloc, estimated at £1.7 billion. The revised upward figure for Britain's budgetary contribution came about because EU bureaucrats recently recalculated that London had been underpaying its stipend since 1995.
On to, frankly, the downright anger about something that has come about at this European Council, and that is the completely unjustified and sudden production of a bill for Britain of £1.7 billion to over €2 billion that is apparently supposed to be paid by the 1st of December. This is completely unacceptable.
It was Cameron who decided to politicise the finances at the EU summit by declaring with a truculent manner that Britain would not be opening its chequebook on demand. Now it turns out, according to the Daily Telegraph, that Britain has quietly worked out a deal with Brussels to pay off its £1.7 billion budget arrears in instalments. No matter that anticipated UKIP mocking will be unfairly exaggerated on the issue, it is nevertheless easy to see how Cameron will be made to look like he capitulated to the Brussels bureaucracy. So, having whipped up a political storm on EU finances to forestall UKIP, Cameron is set to reap a whirlwind of his own making. The other hot potato for Cameron is immigration. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has warned the British leader that if he goes ahead with ad hoc proposals to curb the influx of immigrants from other EU countries into Britain, then that would spell the end of Britain's membership with the bloc. Merkel has reminded Cameron that the free movement of EU citizens among member states is a cornerstone principle of the bloc, and that no state is entitled to impose unilateral restrictions on such movement. Again, Cameron's motivation for making this a contesting issue is because UKIP has successfully tapped into public concerns over perceived immigration. figures actually show that most EU migrant workers are net contributors to their country of abode. One recent study by economists at University College London found that in Britain, EU expatriate workers had contributed some £20 billion to the British public finances over the decade from 2001 to 2011. It is only a negligible minority of EU migrants who might be classed as social welfare tourists, as the Tory right wing and UKIP have clamoured about. However, out of fear of UKIP rivalry, Cameron has decided to play the demagogue card on immigration, and hence posing as a tough bulwark against European hordes invading dear old England. If Cameron dealt with public angst over immigration on an objective, rational basis, he might be able to dispel much of the misconception. That plays straight into the hands of the reactionary right wing in British politics. And so for the hapless Cameron, the November nightmare is set to become self-fulfilling.
To take these discussions further, do not hesitate to contact us, whatever you do. Our Facebook page goes by the name UK Desk Press TV, and our email is britain@presstv.ir. Your take on all this is very important to us, because you've had a look at the monarchy, and the monarchy has had a jolly good look at Britain. See you next week, God willing. Ciao.
Okay, well, that was some interesting little tidbits of news about what's going on in the European Union, and particularly UK, and Cameron's, the Prime Minister of Britain's headaches, his new headaches. So is Cameron long for this world, or is he going to be out soon? What do you think?
No, it depends on if UKIP gets several MPs in, then his leadership will be questioned. And if the current mayor of London succeeds in getting elected as an MP, then that would further back the opposition. But he'll survive, and he won't be lose his position as leader of the party until after an election, and it would have to be a pretty bad result, really, because Labour is in disarray. The opposition is in disarray as well. You know, the Tories, for instance, could be forced to seek a coalition if the Liberal Democrats implode, because at the moment they're ruling in a coalition government. Well, that's never happened before in England. It's always been, you know, the party that has the most votes, majority rule, gets the most MPs, they form the government. So it'll be quite a contested election in 2015, and the issue will be, some of it will be the relationship to the EU, and then the issue of immigration. And even Labour is being forced to deal with that issue, even though they say it's a reactionary politics.
Sure, of course.
But the people that are raising that issue, a lot of them previously voted Labour, but they're disillusioned with Labour, so why not give my vote to UKIP?
It sounds a little bit like American politics in some ways. You see a reflection from across the water in British politics with American politics. And you mentioned, and I think most Americans who are aware of UKIP, the United Kingdom Independent Party, know that it has some similarities with the Tea Party. In other words, they would like to break free from the commitments to the global geopolitical agenda and concentrate more on fixing the difficult issues that are local, you know, and in the country, and people are just, and so I think he's playing into that. He realizes that his power and the power of his colleagues and supporters is threatened by this
populist movement.
Populist, and it's some would call it isolationist, but I don't like to use that term because it's too pejorative. But there's also a sense that, look, why are you concentrating on what's going on in the Middle East? What about us? And and forget this rivalry with Japan, or well, yeah, partly Japan, China, India, and the other rising industrial powers. You know, let's just work on ourselves, and so this also, and lots of other, there are the closer and closer ties that are developing with the EU. Now you have two different poles. You have a pole towards the EU and a pole away from the EU. And I think he's trying to tread a very fine line with keeping the people who are in the EU mollified, like, don't worry, we're not going to leave, but for the local consumption, domestic consumption, it's, oh, these people in Brussels, they want all this money from us, and they're soaking us, and 101.6 billion pounds is, you know, this is outrageous, that they would demand this, and people, the English people would be thinking, see, look at this, they're just trying to soak us, what are we getting out of it, you know? When the reality, of course, is probably that Cameron is on board with strengthening ties with the European Union over time.
If they can, right. Because Germany basically runs the European Union. You know, Germany is the engine of the
Sure,
EU.
they're the most prosperous
and,
country.
They have relatively low unemployment, unlike France, Italy, and Spain, and other EU nations. Basically, the euro
and Greece, yeah.
Yep. And the euro is basically the Deutschmark rebranded. So the politics of UKIP, you know, are those of the local constituencies. They'll probably win 2 or 3 seats in Parliament.
Yeah, in the spring they had a tremendous upsurge in they had an election and they really kicked them butt with the.
Which is easy to do in a by-election because people say, well, they're not going to be in government, so I'll vote for this party.
Yeah.
In a national election where you think, well, if I vote for that party, good grief, they might end up in government. Again, it will depend very much on what the middle class perceives, because Cameron's austerity policies have affected not only the sort of working class and the poor in the UK. They've actually lost the most, but even pension schemes in this area, the teachers, for instance, you know, their pensions have been seized and interfered with to a degree which was unimaginable.
In the UK?
In the UK, yeah, under the austerity program of.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
So you've got a lot of the, you know, the middle class, teaching is very middle class, you know, so you've got a lot of them, they have no love for the, you know, the Tory government. So it'll be how much Cameron convinced the middle class, who are, you know, the ones that really count in the votes, to vote for him again, whereas, you know, and we'll have to see what the opposition, what policies they put forth as an alternative to austerity, because austerity, no matter where it's happened in the UK and throughout the continent of Europe, outside of the, you know, Scandinavia, Holland, and Germany, austerity has had a very real and a hard effect on those countries, on those societies.
Mm-hmm. And the austerity is imposed because of the debt load of the individual country to the world's major banks,
and to the German banks in particular.
Yeah.
For the euro dollar.
But and of course we have to remember also though that the European people also feel that why should our hard-earned dollars or euros go to these lame countries that are staggering, totally like Greece, Spain, they cannot support their weight in this coalition, this financial coalition that we have,
Right.
and so they're wishing that Germans, and this is an issue that I'm sure that the planners who wanted to bring or create the EU knew was coming, would happen, because people have a natural patriotism and they identify with their country as being their homeland instead of the EU as being their homeland, as one country, similar to the United States.
Well, the
where-
United States is
But
very
it's not the
fortunate.
same. That's not
No,
the
it's
same.
not the same,
It's
because
not at all
we're
the
much.
same. But they want to make it similar.
That's right, and they didn't
Yeah.
get the political union developed enough before they introduced a universal currency. I mean, we have the
Right.
dollar. Everybody in
And-
the United States, Mississippi doesn't hold out and say, "Oh no, we've got the Confederate dollar," but the rest, so
And-
we've always agreed on the value of our currency, and it benefits us immensely that the dollar is the international currency.
And it's because the countries in Europe have a long tradition going back thousands of years of being a sovereign nation.
That's right.
And once you give that up, they don't want to give that
No,
up. Actually, they like it the way it is. They identify their personality
Yes.
as a German, as a Frenchman,
Very-
as a Brit.
Yeah.
So they are not willing to give it up, and they of course knew that they were not going to be able to attain a unity, and really somebody like Hitler or even Napoleon, their plan was to unify through conquest Europe as a political union, and now they're trying to. They realize they cannot do that, and they want to use a financial. They want to do it gradually, step by step. Hopefully, hoping that by free immigration from, getting rid of the boundaries, so anybody can move anywhere they want, just as
Which
if it
they
were a
can
single,
currently.
which is
Yep.
make it more like a single country anyway, and then very gradually the political union can sort of manifest.
Right.
But the problem without a political union and only a financial union, then you have another difficulty that arises.
You have potential for, that's right, dissension about the unity.
where people from the wealthier parts have to support the people from the poor parts, and why should I have to do this? This is not my that's not my country.
Yep.
Why,
And also,
so, that's the difficulty.
they have short memories in that, when times were good, just like many of the European banks succumbed to our fine salesmanship and bought junk bonds of the subprime mortgages. They also made available very cheap credit to, Spain, Italy, Greece, because everybody wanted a new house. And so there was a massive real estate boom, and then when that bubble burst, they were left holding, in debt, and then they get their finger wagged at them saying, well, you should have thought about this in the first place.
Like it's all their fault.
It's all your fault. And, and the
Yeah.
German bankers are saying, well, if we just write it off, we're going to take a haircut so bad that,
Sure.
it'll take us 5 years to recoup, at least.
And
you know.
again, we see the same scenario reflected in American politics with the housing bubble and then bust, and that culminated in 2008. That really started way back in the 90s, the late 90s,
That's right.
where they were
Yeah.
building up this artificial bubble or pumping it up. And I had friends who were, like my friend who lives in San Francisco has a house, and he's told me his house was going up in value 10% every year.
That's right.
And or maybe even it was more than that, actually. But in some places it was just impossible. I told him, this can't be real, Barry. This is Barry Wolf. I don't know if you remember
right.
him.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember him, but he lives on Alameda Island in San Francisco Bay, and has a small house there. And so it was just getting crazy. But and so what did they do with the value of the house? They just leveraged.
Yes,
with
that's right. You were
refinancing.
encouraged. Look, you can
Then-
borrow all
yeah,
this
look,
money.
Yeah,
That's
it's like,
right.
wow, this is great. you
That's
know,
great.
We'll buy this and
Yep.
we'll do this.
That's
We'll go on
right.
this, and
Yep.
then suddenly it all collapses, and they're almost lost their house. They barely were
that's
able
right.
to hold on to it,
Yep.
and having a real struggle.
Yep.
Fortunately, his wife or partner, I'm not even sure if they're actually married, but anyway, they've been together many years, and she makes a very good salary
Yes.
at what she does. He's never been able to really get his, but anyway, that's a different story. But they don't have any kids, so that helps.
So you can repay the mortgage still.
They're still there,
Yes,
and I don't
that's
know,
right.
you know, somehow
Yep.
they've managed to stay there.
Yep,
And,
yep.
and people have said, Barry, why don't you sell that place? You could get so much money for it. You could move back to Ohio, and you could buy yourself a mansion with the money that, you know, you got from your house on Alameda Island in this.
The allure
in
of
this
San
county.
Francisco Bay may
Absolutely.
exceed that
Oh
of
yeah, he's still like,
Athens.
why in the heck would I ever want to move back?
Why
to
do I want to
Ohio?
come back to the woods again?
Yeah,
Right.
why would I want to do that?
I don't like squirrel shooting and
Right, exactly.
or
Yeah.
drinking all night or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
sort
right,
of, you know.
right.
What else do you do here? sort
That's
of thing.
right, exactly. And so he goes, you know, he can pop over to Berkeley or Marin County or San Francisco itself. you
It's
know,
called
just,
civilization, as they would say in New
I don't
York.
know. Yeah, well, I suppose it. And yeah, so they get, they somehow, you know, he still complains about it. He complains about everything. But anyway, so yeah, we have the European politics situation is reflected in the United States.
Similar issues.
Similar issues because, and this is partly as a result of globalization, where you have the economic ties are global. It crosses borders more and more across the globe, but these giant banks and the transnational corporations that don't even consider themselves French or American, but more international or just a global.
Engulf and devour.
Engulf and devour, yeah.
You can
And-
hear them on
yeah.
Wall Street cackling if you listen carefully.
Yeah. And they have their. It's almost to the point where the military is being used to support the transnational corporations. Actually,
To a degree.
yeah, to support, because you get this a lot for the we have to invade this country because American interests are threatened. Now that's a fairly honest statement. Not America is threatened, or the American people are threatened, or democracy is threatened, but the American interests. And you might go, oh, well, that sounds reasonable, American interests, except that what they're actually referring to are American corporate interests, which might affect the price of gas a little bit, whether or not they invade that country and get access to that oil, or really it might just only affect the very wealthy stockholders and the suppliers of the infrastructure who own the refineries and so on. The number of Americans who are heavily invested in the stock market now is, there are a lot of tiny little investors, but the really big investors, the heavy hitters, are extremely small percentage, way small. And so they're the ones that really we're talking about when we talk about American interests. Their interests, and that's of course nothing new. That's always been the way it's been.
In Western society, I mean, most people long for is a secure house. You know, to own your own house is still a great dream, and you know, and after all, you can live in the thing. A stock portfolio, although you're advised to have it for your retirement, you can't live in it. Whereas, you know, you think, well, if I pay this debt off, then I can live in the place.
Well, the idea of living on the dividends, you know, was something that was attractive. But now my understanding is that for various reasons, you're oftentimes not getting much of a return on your money when you have your money invested in the stock market, because it just doesn't work that way. They're not. The companies are very often not actually making money. They appear to be making money, and their stock price may be really high, but that's because there's a cannibalistic kind of a little game that's being played. It's a bait and switch kind of a game that's being played in the stock market, where the corporations, to make their stock price look higher, actually buy their own stock. I don't know if you've heard about this. They actually buy it themselves, and then just to keep the numbers up there. And so they have games that they play where they buy it from each other.
Yes.
You know, there's two
Right.
companies that simplify it, and they buy each other's
Yep.
stock, so it looks like it helps both of them, but it's all on paper, and it's not because they're actually selling more product or building a better quality
Yep.
product or whatever it is that they're doing. And so there's a lot of game playing goes on, and also, of course, a lot of the stock trading is not exactly above board, that there's hidden insider games being played that are illegal, that they're not being called on because there's the oversight is so weak,
Yeah.
and they themselves, the oversight groups that have been set up by the government to oversee this, they themselves are tainted. You know?
Well, they were tainted by
Yeah.
neoconservatism to a degree. After all, if the person who's responsible for making sure the rules are followed then says, well, it doesn't, I'm just going to shrug my shoulders and we will let the market forces determine the outcome. And then when the market forces deliver a very unpleasant outcome, which we haven't seen for many years, then they, oh dear, what shall we do? And, the resulting bailout and everything. So,
Right.
And again, these issues are mostly, they certainly do not, it is the middle and upper classes that have the discretion and the wherewithal to either make a decision to invest or speculate or, purchase real estate or whatever. The poor people, are just hoping for a roof over their head and, enough to eat sort of thing.
Sure.
So, and yes, that is subsidized to a degree, but then the United States is not a third world country. We don't want to have a district of town where everybody's living in a cardboard house. You can go to India, and in this modern city of Mumbai, you can also wander into this district and everybody's living in basically a cardboard house with power and a TV, but the house is constructed of tin and cardboard, whatever,
And
and it goes on,
they're probably squatting, right? I mean,
Yes, but they're tolerated because they're also all trying to make a living. I mean, one thing that distinguishes Asia in terms of it, they have pension programs, but there is no unemployment or welfare. If you don't work, your family has to feed you. If you can't get a job, you have to fall back on your family, who presumably will support you. But there's no welfare.
No, what the British call dole. The
Yeah,
dole doesn't
yeah,
exist.
no, it doesn't
No
exist.
food stamps.
No, nowhere in Asia. No, not even China. Yeah, they have a pension, and they say if you're a rural worker and you're a woman, you start collecting the pension at 50. That implies you've been doing heavy labor in the rice paddies, and if you're male, it's 55 or something. And then if you're a citizen, because they have a sort of dual citizenship policy, if you're an urban person, then it starts at 60 and 65. Because you haven't been laboring in the like I say, doing heavy work in rural parts. And even that, in order to leave a rural district and come into the city as you have to apply. and then you become.
can't just move in if you
No,
want to.
there is some, because of their of their building so much, there is a large group that's come in as just laborers, and they don't have the correct papers, but they're still hired. But if you want to make a proper transition from a rural district into an urban district, then you have to apply, and then, oh yes, you're granted, they actually have a sort of two-stage of, and once you are an urban resident, then if you want to go overseas, it's far more, oh yes, here's your passport, that sort of thing. So
I see.
yeah, so I mean, we forget that in countries like China, there's still a very large rural population. It's much smaller than it used to be, but and the same with India as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting system. We don't see anything like
No.
that in the United States.
No.
So that's partly, it's interesting. Now, India is a democracy.
Yes.
It supposedly is a democracy.
Yeah.
And China is a communist country.
A communist capitalist country.
Well, yeah, I suppose it has, and in Hong Kong you have, that kind of thing is tolerated and maybe encouraged, a capitalistic sort of way of doing things.
Hong Kong was always the financial center of China. I mean, that's why the central government of China has left it alone by and large. They want to put their own people. They say you can only vote for this fellow, and this fellow who we've nominated.
Yeah.
But it's a more of administrative, and the residents of Hong Kong are kicking up a fuss now because they say, well, one, it's not very democratic. Why can't we nominate people that reflect our interests as an urban state, as it were, or urban province? Mm-hmm. And the central government in Beijing says, no, we do it this way, our ways. Yeah,
and they want to make sure that they keep a tight control
politically.
over,
yes,
at the very highest level.
Yeah, the thing the Chinese leadership fears the most of all is that the only thing that really makes them look over their shoulder is they saw what happened to Russia, the breakup of the Soviet Union.
Right.
And they have provinces in China in which the Han Chinese are the minority, and they don't like being bossed around, particularly by Beijing, Tibet, and other provinces. And the central leadership is absolutely determined, because of their history and the weak state China was in the 20th century, that this will never happen again. We shall always maintain central control of China.
But I think, now that I don't usually think about the future of China, but I think maybe down the road, I'm very interested in the future, and maybe down the road there will be the breakup of the Chinese empire with the communist control failing because of its own incompetence and its own greed, and because a lot of those very, very high communist officials, I heard on NPR a Chinese man saying that in China, the high-level party officials, we have a tradition, and it's a carryover from the days of the aristocracy, the emperors, of living like aristocracy.
Yes.
With tremendous kowtowing, red carpets, tremendous wealth, palaces. They get the best of everything. This does not at all sound like a communist country.
No.
His explanation was that it's just this is the tradition from
it's
way
a political and cultural tradition.
It's a cultural thing, is what he was saying.
And
I mean, it's not. It's got to be against the very foundational ideas of what communism is all about.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of
no, they
elitism.
no longer wear Mao suits.
That's
now
elitism.
In a jacket and tie.
Exactly, and wealth and power.
Yeah.
And completely displaying that and not even putting on the pretense of being a man of the people, just a peasant thrust into power. Or a military man. I'm a military man. I'm just an ordinary peasant. That was the pose that Mao always took.
a revolutionary leader who came to party
Right.
power through the through revolution, and he was a
Yes.
man of the people.
A man of
Yeah.
the people, exactly.
I mean, the
Pretense
capitalist,
is gone.
the market economy or the capitalist economy has buffered a great deal of resentment against the party, because the implied agreement is that we will allow you, the middle class or whoever, the entrepreneurial group, to make money and prosper, because China was quite a poor nation in proportion to its potential after the Cultural Revolution. Now, once they opened up the market economy, many people have benefited, and you have only to look at the development of Chinese manufacture in the past 30 years.
Right.
I mean, where do we buy? Name me something that isn't made in China.
Exactly.
So,
And so they're doing quite well from that standpoint.
yeah.
Well, we're out of time,
Yeah.
but you are going to China very soon, aren't you?
That's right.
And
I shall
your
be-
wife is there.
Yes, she will be there.
So that'll
Yep.
be a good experience for you.
Yep.
Well, thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for coming on,
A
Bert.
pleasure,
And
Dane.
we'll. I'd love to get you on back,
Yep.
but you're going to be on your
Who
way
knows?
here in a couple days back
Yep.
to
Yep.
the East Coast.
Back to Richmond, Virginia.
All right. Well, that's all for today, folks. Sleep well and have a great weekend.
This message for the program tonight, Welcome Prince of Peace, probably preparing our hearts a little bit for some of the things that are happening maybe personally in your lives or even around the world today. And we just thank the Lord that we can put our trust in